Hello watch lovers, welcome back to the channel. My name is Stian, and this horror show you're just watching now is John's Malona watch. As you might have guessed from seeing those initial photos, this watch is not running, and it's also in pretty beat up shape. We see that the gold plating has flaked off a lot. Case back is also quite scratched, and someone mirror polished it at some point, which it probably shouldn't be. The watch used to belong to John's father, and he inherited it when his father passed away. And it has a lot of sentimental value, so he did try to have it fixed at a few different jewelers and watchmakers without luck. So we'll see if I have any more luck with it. I lost the disassembly files in my big computer crash last year, but the most interesting parts are definitely in the assembly, as we will see. So we have these parts here. And let's just jump into the reasons why this watch was not running. And my God, are there reasons. This is the 3/4 bridge. It's made of brass, as most bridges and main plates are in watches. And this is a bearing hole. That should be round. This is not round. And someone has tried to, I'm not sure, make the hole smaller maybe with something relatively sharp. And I think that same person was on sort of a mission. We'll see his trademark a little bit later. Here we have another worn hole. That should be round. This one should also be round. And this is what it looks like with a pivot in it. Not exactly how it should look. There's a chipped jewel. And I'm not sure what's with all those marks around it. And then we have Mr. Blunt Force again, applying his skills to this hole. Looks bad from the top, but from the underside it looks even worse. And no, this is not a way to repair anything, obviously. So we do need some spare parts, and luckily I found brand new shiny spare parts. Look at this, straight out of the factory. Or not. But this is the sad reality sometimes, working on vintage watches. You basically have to play the hand you're dealt. So let's see what we can do. I'm going to start with oiling the jewels. These tiny dots here are the jewels in the shock settings on the balance. I'm going to put a tiny little bead of oil at the center of these capstones, these rubies here. And that will ensure a very low friction when the balance oscillates. So you might even notice that one of the jewels is probably about twice the thickness of the other one. If you see that, then a thick jewel goes into the balance cock. And yes, it's been quite a while since my last video. I've been very busy working on something I will reveal very shortly. So stay tuned for that. Hope that will be a very interesting video. We're going to put the shock settings back into the main plate and the balance cock. They're held in place by these little springs. And so far everything kind of seems alright. We just cleaned everything. We're going to test if the balance oscillates freely. And that looks all right. Note that the balance regulator is way off to the side. That's something we'll worry about later when we're going to time the watch. But yes, there is an issue there as well. So we do of course want to keep as much of the watch original as possible. So we are going to reuse all the parts we can. Some we cannot. More than we might expect, but we'll find that out a little later. Let's just first make sure we get the hairspring properly out of this little container ring. With the barrel ready, we can then start on the assembly of the movement. The movement is the Felsa 415, the so-called bidinator. It is the first bidirectional automatic winding movement. The very first was this same movement with sub-seconds. This one has center seconds. And Felsa was very well known, very well regarded for making automatic movements. They were part of the Bosch SA, which later became ETA. And they specialized and were allowed to specialize in automatic movements. That said, this movement has quite a few design flaws, I think. One of them being the barrel. It is actually only resting on this sort of post. It does not have a top bearing. So that does allow the barrel to move a little bit more up and down than you'd like. A bit more end shake than you would have in a mechanism where you have bearing above and below for the barrel. With the wheels in place on the main plate, we're going to put on the 3/4 bridge, but first we need to put on the winding works on the underside of it. There are 3 wheels there, and they then interact with this winding mechanism on top of the barrel, which is also a bit of a strange design, as we'll see later. Speaking of strange designs, regular viewers of the channel probably know that I'm Norwegian. I lived in the Netherlands for quite a while. Now I'm living in Switzerland. And I do know a few languages, and right now I'm very focused on learning French. And one thing that struck me the other day is that in all the languages I know, you always say brush your teeth. Or I'm brushing my teeth. And it's the same in Norwegian, Swedish, Danish, English, Dutch, German, French, all the languages I know. Probably other languages also. And there must be a reason why we say brush your teeth and I brush my teeth. Can you imagine? Probably sometime long time ago, someone went around and brushed other people's teeth and then said, hey, you brush your teeth. I want to brush my own teeth. And the really mind-boggling thing is that this probably must have happened so long ago that it was before we had all the languages we have now, since all languages have this my teeth and your teeth. That's really something to think about, right? Or maybe I'm just spending too much time by myself. Anyway, we're on the dial side. We're going to put together the keyless works. If you look closely on the left side of the movement now, there is this dots and a couple of stripes. Let me know in the comments if you know what those were for. You often see them on movements from the 40s and 50s. And this movement is from the 50s. So far everything seems like smooth sailing. But that's of course because we haven't actually tried to see if the watch runs yet. And you might think that, looks like everything is fine. And yes, it does. But there is so little power in a mechanical watch that if there is too much friction in one wheel, one bearing, or in the escapement, of course, then the whole watch will not run. Just the escapement in the Swiss lever watch takes about 70% of the power from the mainspring. So there really isn't a lot to go around. We're putting in the last part of the keyless works. And then we're going to put in the pallet fork and then try to make the watch run. Finished with the keyless works, we can then turn the movement over again and put in the pallet fork. We also need to put in the click, which is a little bit of another strange thing on this movement. Felsa like to make a little bit odd clicks. I think Felsa made some very high quality movements, really cool movements as well, but some strange designs here and there. And this is one of their less successful movements in my view. Anyway, we're going to put a little bit of wind on the mechanism so that we can lubricate the pallet. Lubricate the exit pallet here, and then we spread that over the escape wheel teeth. This rubbing action is of course the main reason why the Swiss lever movement, or the escapement, drags so much power from the mainspring. But there are a lot of benefits to the movement as well, of course. The way the balance is put in is also a little bit out of the ordinary. The balance cock covers most of the pallet fork, so it's a bit difficult to see the alignment and so forth. Not really a huge thing, but still a little bit odd. So we see here I put the regulator in the middle. It's worth noting that in these old watches, the regulator and the index are one part, so you cannot always put the regulator in the middle. But we'll see on the timing machine what happens when we did. Gonna first demagnetize the movement. And here we are. So this is not really great. The watch is running very, very fast, and the amplitude is not high. So what I'm doing first of all is to pull the regulator back as far up as it goes. So basically towards slow as much as possible. And then we'll see that the rate is still 180 seconds per day, which is great if you like to be early for things, but not so great otherwise. So what this means is that somehow the hairspring is too short. We cannot move it farther, and there is no loose end on the hairspring either, so we could loosen it and make it longer. So we're going to have to replace the balance. We're going to try this one from one of the other old crappy movements. What we find here is that the hairspring is a bit messed up. It's not at all flat. So we are going to try to make it a bit flatter. When the hairspring is not flat, that's because there is a twist. And mostly that's from where the hairspring goes into the collet. But these hairsprings are very, very delicate. So the way we do it is to gently push down or pry up based on where the hairspring is going up or down. I'm using an old oiler for this. Oilers are very nice tools for all kinds of small jobs. And ultimately, after working on this for a little while, we do manage to get the hairspring to a decent state. The thing is, you can never unbend metal that has been bent. The original bend will always be there. You just have to try to figure out how to bend it as close as possible the other way. And then we have another snag, and that is that the stud here is freely rotating inside the stud holder. Normally the studs can only go in one position, but this one can be moved back and forth. I'm not sure that's by design, but it's not a good design if that is the case. So our first effort with a new balance aren't that encouraging. Those lines are not at all straight, and the beat error is very high. Let's tackle the beat error first, and I am going to show you a dangerous technique for adjusting the beat error. It is a much faster technique than taking the balance off and adjusting it and putting it back on. But the risk of damaging the hairspring is also 1,000 times higher. So be careful. So basically hold the balance in the balance tack. And then you put a blade into the slot in the collet. And here's the important part. You don't twist the blade, because if it slips, you're going to ruin the hairspring. Instead, you hold the blade and you rotate the wheel between your fingers. But be very cautious with that method, because it is very easy to damage the hairspring. What I'm doing here, I'm also changing this double click. These double clicks are prone to breaking, and I did not like how that one felt. It is possible to get these parts still for a not unreasonable price. And as we can see, hopefully the new one does look quite a bit better. That should make the power delivery a little bit smoother. At least I hope so. We're going to lubricate those clicks a little bit as well, so that they slip nicely inside that double wheel. And then we can get ready for another round. See if this balance and this change of that double click helps. I also think it's important to perhaps discuss a little bit about expectations when we have disaster watches like this. This is originally a high quality movement, for sure. Felsa was very high quality. That the brand Malona doesn't ring a bell, that's fine. There were tons of brands that don't exist anymore. But when we have watches that have been messed up this badly, then we first of all want to try to make them run, and then make them run semi-decently. So that's basically our ambition level here. The watch is running a lot better now, so that did help. We're also going to check the space between the index pin and the boot here. We see that is way too big as it is now. So that is costing us some amplitude. We make that space smaller simply by squeezing the pin towards the boot. And I was actually very surprised that all of a sudden the movement started running very well. This is the best it's running. It does show some variation between the positions and so forth. But it is running decently, so we're going to be happy with that. We can then start building the automatic mechanism. First is that we have this cover on top of the central seconds pinion, which is then also the base, the post for the rotor. And here, of course, we have another pretty major flaw with this movement, that all these wheels run directly in the plate. There's no jeweled bearings here. So that is a weakness, especially this wheel here that has just a relatively thin piece of brass holding it. And there is quite a lot of sideways pressure on that wheel. The bidetonator name is from this lever here that goes back and forth depending on which way the rotor is turned, and will always ensure that the watch is wound in one direction only. It's very clever. And then we have the automatic click here with the world's longest, thinnest spring. And then the cover for the automatic works, you might remember, being extremely chewed up. so I did replace the cover with a different one, but that's the one that has this elongated hole. So what we're going to do, we're going to find a jewel that fits that pivot. That jewel will, however, not fit the hole for that really worn bearing. The bronze bearing or brass bearing that was there is much smaller. So we're going to have to make the hole in that plate bigger. So the jewel is 1.2 millimeters. And that means that we're going to make the hole 0.01 millimeters smaller than that. We have this set from sites, jeweling with reamers. And this reamer is 119. And the 119 is not at the tip, it's at the shank. So when we push this through the hole, then the hole is 1.19 millimeters. And what that means is that we have that 0.01 millimeter for the friction fit. So we're going to take the handle off this sites jeweling tool. I am going to use the other pusher here just to center the piece. The reamer is self-centering, but it doesn't hurt to make sure that you're as centered as possible. So then we can take this one out. Once we hold the piece steady there. And then we can put in the reamer and make the hole 1.19 millimeters in diameter. The reamer is steel and the plate is brass, so the reamer will cut that quite nicely. It will still leave a little bit of a burr on the underside here. It will leave a little bit of a burr on the underside, so we can remove that burr with a chamfering tool. And then we have a little bit nicer hole. If we look at the jewel, we can see it also has a little chamfer on one side, and that's the side that we're then going to press into the plate. And of course we want to make sure that we have the oil sink on the right side. It's not on the left side, never on the left side. The jeweling tool has a central little pin that goes into the hole in the jewel and then centers it. And then we can press down until we have the underside of the jewel flush with the plate. That's the rule of thumb. So here it's a little bit too far out still, so we're going to press it in a little bit more. And at some point we should be good. The risk we run is that the hole we made isn't centered properly, and then the wheels can jam up. The other risk is that we didn't do the depthing properly, so that the wheel either has too much or too little end shake. I actually did have to adjust the end shake for the jewel we pressed in again, but otherwise it's fine. So let's then turn to the dial. Whenever I work on watches with dials that are tarnished, like this one, there's always going to be like 100 comments saying, oh, you should have cleaned the dial. And the thing is that dials are extremely fragile. And the dirt on a dial like this is not on the surface. It has gone down into the varnish. So if you rub off too much, you will rub off the varnish. And if that is in a place where there's lettering, that lettering will disappear. So when someone is saying clean the dial, it's pretty much the same as telling someone with freckles to wash their face. It's really not gonna do the trick. So we can see I'm actually going a little bit too far here. So we see that varnish is disappearing. That's not in a place with lettering, so it's still not too bad, but that's the danger you run whenever you try to clean a dial. So one of the dial screws was missing, but we could take one from one of the other movements. Then we put on the hour wheel and we can put on the dial. I'm going to clean up the hands a little bit also before we put them on, but there's not a lot we can do about them. There's also not a lot we do want to do about them, given that the dial does look its age. And that also applies to the case. So in my view, the watch has to look consistent. It will look very strange if you have a brand new looking dial and an old looking case, or vice versa. So what that means for this case is that we're not going to make it look brand new. We are going to, let's say, bring it up to a standard a little bit, but we're not going to make it all new and shiny. But before we get to the case, let's get the hands on the watch. And with the hands on, we can then turn our attention to the case. So the main issue with the case is the lugs. There's also a little bit of flaking on the sides of the case, but the lugs are really what makes it look really bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to take off that little bit of gold plating left on the lugs. And then we're going to plate the case with palladium as a sort of protection layer. And then we're going to gold plate the case. So that way the case will look better, but it will also not look completely new. So I think and hope that's a pretty good compromise. And the last step is then to buff the case so we get out the luster. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my members both on YouTube and Patreon. Thanks so much, guys. You really help make this possible. We are running a chronometer project right now, where we're taking a standard 6497-98 and trying to make it run as a chronometer. Going very deep into how to service watches well. So if you're curious about that, check out the membership options. We're then going to plate the case. I have this very easy setup. I'm basically afraid of anything that has to do with electricity, so I really don't feel comfortable wiring too many things. So I got this tabletop thing instead. Very easy to use. We first use the electro cleaner to take off any grease, things like fat from your fingers, what have you. Any cleaning soap that was left from the ultrasonic, for instance. And then we do the service activator, and then we're going to put the case into the last bath, which is palladium. And palladium serves as a barrier so that the gold we're going to plate with later doesn't get corroded. So that's the plating with palladium. We see the watch looks sort of like steel. That is the palladium color. And then I'm basically redoing the exact same process with the gold plating instead of the palladium. So with that, we can then put in a new crystal and case the watch. We can also see that the lug holes are also pretty worn on this watch. Not a lot we can do about that. But there is no immediate danger of losing the strap, for instance. We're going to put on the rotor. Let's just have a look at how this locking mechanism works. You see this lever on the right side here. When it's in the inner locked position, we see this little bolt coming through there, and that's locking in the post of the rotor. And if we pull the little lever out, we see that that bolt is then retracted. And it's all held in place by this little ring spring. So a little clever little mechanism. So there we have the rotor back on as well. And the last thing to do is the case back. But we're also going to refinish the case back a little bit. So I put that on the lathe. And then we're going to put radial brushing on it. For that I'm using a 320 grit sandpaper. And it seems I'm not using a razor. My daughter today, by the way, asked if I could save my beard so I could become a Santa. I suppose. I think I'm kind of am Santa already, but anyway, after doing this for a while, we do get a little bit nicer finish. There were some pretty deep scratches that we're not going to take out. We cannot remove that much material, but at least it looks a bit better. And there is the watch. Before seeing the watch on the wrist, I just want to remind everyone that at vintagewatchservices.eu you will always find more than 100 beautiful vintage watches. And as a YouTube subscriber, you can use this coupon code for 10% off. And there we have it. John's 1950s Malona watch with a lot of sentimental value. I hope John will be happy with this watch, and I hope you enjoyed watching the video. I'll be back with another video shortly. Until then, ta-ta.